The first time I realized the HOA cameras weren't watching for criminals, I was standing in my own kitchen at 2013 in the morning, staring at a monitor that showed a man walking around my property with a flashlight. He wasn't breaking in. He wasn't stealing anything. He was standing beside my bedroom window. And when he raised the flashlight toward the glass, I recognized the tiny red light on the camera mounted to his chest. That was the moment I understood something that made my stomach turn. The HOA hadn't installed those cameras to protect our neighborhood. They had installed them to watch us. 3 weeks earlier, I would have laughed if somebody had told me that. I owned a 40-acre ranch at the far end of Cedar Hollow Estates, a development in central Texas where the houses gradually gave way to pasture mesquite trees and long stretches of gravel road. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 42 years old, 6'1", broad-shouldered, with short brown hair, a trimmed beard, hazel eyes, and the kind of sunburned skin you get from spending half your life outdoors. I usually wore faded blue jeans, a gray work shirt, brown leather boots, and a black felt cowboy hat. I'd lived on that property for 11 years. My wife Emily and I had bought it before Cedar Hollow became expensive. Back then, nobody cared what color your fence was. Nobody cared whether your mailbox matched the neighborhood guidelines. And nobody certainly cared whether a camera could see through your bedroom window. We had cattle, 2 horses, 3 dogs, and a red barn behind the house. The property was quiet. That was why we'd bought it. Then the development expanded. New houses appeared along the northern boundary. A private clubhouse went up. Streetlights appeared along roads that had once been dark. And eventually, the HOA board announced a new community security initiative. They called it a modernization project. At the first homeowners meeting, show President Margaret Collins stood at the front of the clubhouse wearing a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and a perfectly practiced smile. Margaret was 56, tall and slender, with shoulder-length blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin, and a habit of holding her hands together whenever she wanted to appear reasonable. "We've had several security concerns," she announced. I looked around the room. Nobody knew what she was talking about. A neighbor named Rick Henderson raised his hand. "What security concerns?" Margaret smiled. "Minor incidents. Suspicious vehicles. Trespassing concerns. Nothing to panic about." Then she announced the cameras. 24 of them, mounted on utility poles, entrance gates, clubhouse buildings, and several common area structures. According to Margaret, the cameras would monitor public areas only. "The system is designed for everyone's safety," she said. I didn't object. Honestly, I thought it was a good idea. Our neighborhood had gotten bigger, and bigger neighborhoods sometimes attracted bigger problems. The problem started when the cameras appeared along the northern road. One of them was mounted on a tall pole directly across from my ranch entrance. Another faced the gravel road leading toward my barn. I noticed them because the second camera wasn't pointed toward the road. It was pointed toward my house. I mentioned it at the next HOA meeting. Margaret immediately dismissed my concern. "Daniel, the cameras have wide-angle lenses. Then why is this one facing my house? It's positioned to cover the road." I checked it. She smiled. "You're mistaken." That answer bothered me more than it should have, so I drove home that evening and walked the entire boundary. The camera was definitely pointed toward my property. I could see the angle clearly. It wasn't watching the road. It was watching my driveway, my front porch, and part of the side of my house. I called the HOA office. Nobody answered. I emailed. No response. 3 days later, I received a letter. It wasn't about the camera. It was about my fence. Apparently, the wooden fence around the southern pasture was visually inconsistent with community standards. I stared at the letter for nearly a minute. That fence had been there for 8 years. Nobody had ever complained. I ignored it. 5 days later, another letter arrived. This time it was about my red barn. The board claimed the exterior color didn't conform to the architectural guidelines. I laughed. Then I stopped laughing. Because attached to the letter was a photograph, taken from inside my property. The angle was impossible from the road. Someone had been standing deep inside my pasture. Emily saw my face. "What is it?" I handed her the photograph. She stared at it. "Daniel, who took this?" "I don't know." That night, I checked every gate, every lock, every camera. Nothing. The next morning, I found fresh tire tracks near the western fence. Not ranch equipment, a vehicle. Someone had driven onto my land, and I knew exactly who I was going to ask. Margaret. I drove to the HOA office and walked straight into her conference room. She looked up from her computer. "Daniel, who took this picture?" I placed the photograph on her desk. For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret didn't smile. She looked at the photograph, then at me. "Where did you get this?" That's not an answer. Her expression hardened. "That photograph was taken as part of a property compliance inspection." "By whom?" "Our security contractor." "Your security contractor drove onto my private property. They were documenting visible violations from inside my pasture." She leaned back. "You have nothing to worry about." I picked up the photograph. "That's what worries me." I walked out. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it was the beginning. 2 nights later, one of my dogs started barking around midnight. I stepped outside with a flashlight. The ranch was completely dark except for the porch light. The horses were restless. Then I heard something. A faint mechanical clicking. I looked toward the northern fence. Nothing. I walked closer. That's when I saw the red light, a tiny red light mounted beneath the camera. It blinked once. Then again I stood there watching it, and suddenly my phone vibrated. A message from Emily. "Come inside." Now, I turned toward the house. She was standing behind the kitchen window. Her face was pale. I ran inside. "What happened?" She pointed toward the living room. The television was on. Not our television, the security monitor, the one we'd installed months earlier to watch the barn and driveway. Emily had opened the system's remote access application. She was staring at the screen. What am I looking at? She pointed. That, on the monitor, was our driveway live. I frowned. That's our camera. No. She zoomed in. The image was slightly different. The angle was higher, wider. And there was something else. A small digital timestamp appeared in the corner. Then a second window opened. Our front porch. Then another, the side yard, then the barn, then our kitchen window. My blood ran cold. Where is this coming from? Emily shook her head. I don't know. I grabbed my laptop. We spent the next hour checking every device connected to our network. Nothing. No unknown camera. No hacked account. Unfamiliar login. Then at 20:13 am the screen changed. The feed switched to the northern boundary. I watched a man walk into view. Black jacket. Dark cap. Flashlight. He stopped beside the fence. Then he turned toward the camera. And for just a second, the flashlight illuminated his face. I recognized him. It was one of the HOA's security contractors. But he wasn't looking at the road. He was looking directly toward our house. Then he raised something in his hand. A tablet. And the screen on his tablet showed a live image of my bedroom window. Emily grabbed my arm. Daniel. The man stayed there for nearly 30 seconds. Then he walked away. I thought that was the worst part. I was wrong. Because when I rewound the footage, I noticed something I hadn't seen the first time. The camera wasn't recording just our property. It was recording every house along the northern boundary. Bedrooms, backyards, driveways, pools. And in one feed, I could clearly see a family sitting at their dining room table. I stared at the screen. Then I said the words that changed everything. We need to find out where they're storing this. The next morning, I contacted an attorney named Michael Reyes. Michael was 48, Hispanic with short black hair, dark brown eyes, an athletic build, and a calm personality that made him difficult to intimidate. He wore dark suits, brown dress shoes, and carried a worn leather briefcase everywhere. I showed him everything. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned forward. Daniel, don't confront the AA again. Why? Because if they're doing what you think they're doing, you don't want to warn them. He looked at the footage. Then he asked one question. Do you know who owns the camera system? The OA. Are you sure? I wasn't. Michael closed his laptop. Then that's what we find out first. 2 days later, he filed a formal records request with the AOA. We asked for the security contract, camera locations, retention policies, access logs, the company's name, who could view the recordings, and where the recordings were stored. Margaret responded within 6 hours. Her message contained only one sentence. The requested materials are confidential and protected under the HOA's security provisions. Michael read it twice. Then he smiled. Not because it was funny, because something had just confirmed his suspicion. Daniel, he said, they're hiding something. That afternoon, I drove home and found a county surveyor standing near my western fence. He introduced himself as Thomas Reed. Thomas was 61, tall and thin with gray hair, a gray mustache, green eyes, khaki field clothes, work boots, and a faded tan surveyor's hat. He showed me his identification. County received a complaint about an easement. What easement? He pointed toward my property. The HOA claims they have a recorded access easement across your western boundary. I stared at him. They don't. Thomas looked uncomfortable. That's what I thought. He pulled out a map. Then he pointed to a line running beneath my pasture. This is the strange part. What? The easement they're claiming doesn't exist on the original county plat. My heart started beating faster. What does it show? Thomas looked at me. It shows the HOA installed infrastructure across private land without a recorded right of access. I looked toward the distant camera pole. Suddenly, the entire situation looked different. The cameras weren't just watching my property. They might have been using my property to operate. And if Thomas was right, the HOA had been crossing my land illegally. But neither of us knew yet why. We were about to find out, and when we did, I would discover that the cameras had been recording something far more valuable than our private lives. They had been recording evidence. Evidence that could bring the entire HOA down. The next morning, Michael Reyes called me before I had even finished my coffee. His voice was different, not worried, focused. Daniel, I found the security contract. I set the mug down. Where? Not in the HOA records. Then where? County procurement records. I stood up. What does that mean? It means the HOA didn't buy the system directly. I waited. Michael continued. The company operating the cameras is called Sentinel Ridge Security. And according to the contract, they're not simply providing security. What are they providing? Data collection. For several seconds, I didn't say anything. I looked through the kitchen window toward the northern fence. That camera was still there watching. Michael told me to meet him at his office. I arrived 40 minutes later. He had several documents spread across his conference table. The first was the security contract. The second was a property map. The third was something that made my stomach tighten, a list of camera locations. There were 37 cameras. Not 24, I counted twice, 37. Michael tapped the page. I followed his finger. Entrance gate, clubhouse, pool, parking lot, common road. Then I saw the last section. Private boundary cameras. 14 cameras were positioned along privately owned parcels. Mine had 6. 6 cameras. I stared at the number. Why would an HOA need 6 cameras watching one ranch? Fat, Michael said, is exactly what we're going to find out. He handed me another document. It was a monthly invoice. The HOA was paying Sentinel Ridge $18,700 every month. For security, Michael nodded. But there's more. He turned the page. A separate line item said behavioral and property activity monitoring. I felt something cold move through my chest. What does that mean? We don't know yet. Michael leaned back. But we know somebody is paying for information. He had me sign a formal preservation notice. That meant Sentinel Ridge and the HOA were being put on notice not to delete, alter, or destroy relevant recordings. Then Michael gave me one instruction. Don't touch the cameras. I laughed bitterly. I wasn't planning too good. Because if we can prove the system was improperly installed or accessed, we need the evidence intact. I drove home. The entire way, I kept thinking about that phrase. Behavioral monitoring. What behavior? What were they watching and why? That evening, I called my neighbor, Sarah Whitmore. Sarah lived 2 houses away with her husband and teenage daughter. She was 44 with shoulder-length brown hair, green eyes, light skin, and average build, and usually wore a denim jacket, jeans, and white sneakers. She answered on the second ring. Daniel, I need to ask you something. There was silence. Have you noticed the cameras? Her voice became quiet.
Yes. How long? Months.
My grip tightened around the phone. Did the HOA ever tell you they were recording your backyard?
No. Your house. No. Your windows.
She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, Daniel, they recorded my daughter. I stopped walking. Last month, she was changing clothes in her bedroom. My stomach dropped. What happened? She noticed a red light outside her window. I felt my jaw tighten. Did you report it? I called the HOA aide. They said it was impossible. Sarah's voice cracked. They told me the cameras couldn't see inside houses. I looked toward my own bedroom window. Sarah, that's not true. I know. She whispered the next sentence. Because I saw the recording. My entire body went still. What recording? Someone sent it to me? Ooh, I don't know. What did it show? She took a breath. My daughter standing in her room. I closed my eyes.
Do you still have it?
No. Why? They demanded I delete it. Who demanded it? The AA. That was enough. I told Sarah to save every email, every message, and every letter she had. Then I called Michael. He was silent for several seconds after I explained. Finally, he said, we need a court order. The next morning, Michael filed for an emergency injunction. The HOA responded within hours. Their attorney was named Gregory Shaw. Gregory was 52, clean-shaven, with silver hair, gray eyes, pale skin, and an expensive charcoal suit. He had a reputation for being aggressive in property disputes. He requested a meeting. Michael agreed. We met at a law office downtown. Margaret Collins was there. So were 2 HOA board members, David Parker and Linda Brooks. David was 63, heavy-set bald with a white goatee and dark eyes. He wore a brown sport coat and polished black shoes. Linda was 58, short and slim with curly dark red hair, brown eyes, and a green cardigan over a cream blouse. Margaret sat between them. Gregory opened the meeting. This situation has been dramatically misunderstood. Michael smiled. Then explain it. Gregory folded his hands. The cameras monitor public-facing areas. I placed a printed photograph on the table. It showed my bedroom window. Gregory looked at it. That's not proof of improper recording. Michael placed another document beside it. The camera access map says otherwise. Gregory didn't respond. Michael continued. And this invoice describes behavioral and property activity monitoring. Gregory's expression changed, just slightly, but I saw it. Then Margaret spoke. Those terms refer to community safety analytics. What analytics? I asked. She looked at me. Traffic patterns, vehicle movement, property activity. You're monitoring when people leave their homes. Only for security purposes. And when they return, security. When they have visitors. Security. I leaned forward. And when they're inside their bedrooms. Nobody answered. The room went silent. Gregory finally said, there is no evidence that anyone has intentionally monitored private interiors. I looked at Michael. He was smiling again. That was when I knew he had something. He reached into his briefcase and removed a USB drive. Then perhaps you can explain this. Gregory stared at it. What is that? An access log. Margaret's face changed. Michael connected to his laptop. A spreadsheet appeared. Thousands of entries. Date times, user IDs, camera numbers, duration. I recognized my property immediately. Camera 12, camera 13 or 14, camera 15. Someone had accessed those feeds hundreds of times, but one user ID appeared more often than the others. MCL Avanayan. I looked at Margaret. Who's MCL? She didn't answer. Michael looked at her. Margaret Collins. Her eyes narrowed. That proves nothing. It proves your administrator account accessed private boundary cameras repeatedly. Gregory interrupted. We're done here. Michael closed the laptop. Gregory looked at him. Michael's voice remained calm. We're just getting started. The meeting ended 5 minutes later. Outside, Michael pulled me aside. Don't go home yet. Why? Because I think they know we found the logs. He was right. That evening, I parked my truck behind the barn instead of in front of the house. At 9:40 p.m., I noticed a black SUV moving slowly along the northern road. It stopped. The headlights went off. I grabbed binoculars. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He carried a ladder. Then he walked toward one of the camera poles. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Marcus Hill arrived 20 minutes later. Marcus was 39, tall and muscular, with closely cropped black hair, brown eyes, medium brown skin, and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a standard tan sheriff's uniform, black duty boots, and a dark campaign hat. He walked toward the SUV. The man immediately climbed into the driver's seat. Marcus knocked on the window. The SUV pulled away. Marcus radioed the license plate, then he turned to me. Do you recognize him? No, he looked toward the camera pole.
Does the HOA own that?
Wes!
Marcus frowned. Then why is their contractor replacing equipment this late? I didn't have an answer. He looked at me. Neither do I. The next morning, something was missing. Camera 13. The pole was still there. The camera was gone. So was the wiring. I called Michael. His response was immediate. They're destroying evidence. We drove to the county courthouse. Thomas Reed was already there. He had brought the original property plat. He spread it across a conference table. Then he showed us something he'd discovered overnight. The camera network's underground cable route. It ran directly across my western pasture. Then underneath my barn, I stared at the map. Under my barn, Thomas nodded. That's not all. He traced the line with his finger. It continues beneath the old service road. Where does it go? Thomas looked at Michael, then back at me. An underground utility structure. What utility structure? Thomas hesitated. According to the county records, there isn't supposed to be one. The room became silent. Michael stood. Can you locate it? Thomas nodded. If we get permission to survey the area. I signed immediately. That afternoon Thomas brought 2 technicians. They scanned the western pasture. The equipment began making a faint electronic tone. Thomas followed the signal. It led toward the red barn. Then stopped. He looked at me. Daniel, when was this barn built? 11 years ago. Are you sure?
Wes.
He looked at the scan. There's something underneath it. We moved the cattle temporarily. Thomas marked the floor. Then he found an old concrete section beneath a pile of hay. I had never noticed it. He tapped the concrete. Hollow. We removed the hay. There was a steel access hatch underneath. My heart started pounding. I had lived here 11 years. I'd never seen it. Michael called the county sheriff. Within an hour, Deputy Hill returned with another officer. We opened the hatch. A narrow concrete stairway descended into darkness. The air smelled damp. Michael looked at me. Do you want to go down? I nodded. We descended. At the bottom was a small underground room, and inside that room were racks of equipment. Hard drives, network switches, power backups, monitors, dozens of cables, all labeled with camera numbers, camera 12, camera 14, camera 15, but there was something else, a second set of labels. Names, not houses. People. Sarah, Rick, Emily. I felt sick. They weren't just recording properties, they were organizing people. Deputy Hill stared at the equipment. Who authorized this? Nobody answered. Then Michael noticed a blinking monitor. He walked closer. The screen displayed a live feed. It was my house. But the feed wasn't from outside, it was inside. The camera angle showed our living room. I stared at the screen. That camera isn't mine. Michael looked around the room. New. He pointed toward the ceiling. Find it. We searched. Nothing. Then Emily called my phone. I answered. Daniel, where are you? I'm at the barn. Her voice trembled. You need to come home? What happened? I found something. What? I found a camera. My heart stopped. Where? In our bedroom. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she whispered. It isn't one of ours. I looked at Michael. He understood immediately. Someone had placed a hidden camera inside my home, and whoever had access to it was still watching. At that exact moment, one of the monitors in the underground room changed. A new message appeared on the screen. Ramani Usar Cullen. Then another line appeared. Camera low 1, a CTIV. Michael stared at it. I stared at him. And then the screen displayed a live image of Emily standing in our bedroom. She was looking directly at the hidden camera, and behind her, reflected in the bedroom mirror, was a man standing in the doorway. I knew that man. It was David Parker, the HOA board member. And he was already inside my house. I didn't think I ran. Michael shouted something behind me, but I was already climbing the stairs out of the underground room. I sprinted across the pasture toward the house, boots striking the dry ground, my heart hammering against my ribs. Emily was still on the phone. Daniel. Lock the doors. They're locked. Stay away from the windows. What is happening? I'll explain when I get there. I reached the house in less than 3 minutes. My truck was still parked beside the barn, but there was another vehicle in the driveway, a dark gray SUV. I recognized it immediately. David Parker's. I pulled my pistol from the truck's locked compartment but kept it pointed toward the ground. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. I was looking for my wife. I entered through the back door. I'm here. She was standing in the hallway holding a kitchen knife. Her face was pale. I immediately moved beside her. Where is he? I don't know. What happened? She pointed toward our bedroom. I heard something. I came in here and found that. A small black camera sat behind a decorative picture frame. The lens was barely visible. Michael arrived moments later with Deputy Hill. We searched every room. David was gone, but the back door was unlocked, and on the kitchen counter was something none of us had seen before. A white envelope. My name was written on it. Michael opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. There were only 6 words. Stop digging, Daniel, you won't like it. Deputy Hill photographed everything. Then he looked at me. This isn't an HOA violation anymore. No, I said. It isn't. That evening, the sheriff's office secured the house. Detectives removed the hidden camera and several other devices we hadn't known existed. There were 4. 1 in the bedroom, 1 in the living room, 1 facing the back door, and 1 inside the garage. The detective told us they were professional, grade devices. They weren't something a random trespasser had purchased at a hardware store. Someone had planned this. Someone had money, and someone had access. The next morning, Michael called me. Daniel, don't talk to anyone from the HOA. Why? Because we found the company behind Sentinel Ridge. I waited. It's owned by a holding company. What holding company? Cedar Hollow Development Partners. I felt my stomach drop. That's the company that built the neighborhood. Exactly. The HOA wasn't merely hiring an outside security company. The developer still had financial interests connected to the system. But there was another problem. Michael had discovered that several board members had received payments from companies connected to the developer. Margaret, David, Linda, all three. Small payments at first, consulting fees, property advisory fees, then larger ones, much larger. I asked Michael the obvious question. What were they paying them for? He looked at me. We don't know yet. Thomas Reed gave us the answer 2 days later. He had finished the survey. The underground cable wasn't simply carrying camera footage. It was connected to a fiber optic network running underneath private properties. The HOA had built an unauthorized communications corridor, and my ranch sat directly over the central junction. But why? That was the question. Until Thomas found an old county development map. He spread it across Michael's desk. A section of my property was highlighted. This land was supposed to become a commercial development. I frowned. I'm aware of that. Look at the original plan. I did. A large portion of the surrounding land was marked for future construction. Then Thomas pointed to my ranch. Your property was the missing piece. Michael looked at him. What missing piece? The development company wanted to build a second phase. He pointed toward the northern edge of my land, but they couldn't because Daniel's property blocked the planned access road. I stared at the map. Suddenly everything made sense. The cameras, the easement, the inspections, the complaints about my fence, the pressure, the strange letters. They weren't trying to control my property because they cared about the fence. They wanted me to sell, and if they could make living there unbearable, I might eventually give up. Michael nodded slowly. The surveillance wasn't just about security. It was leverage, I said. Exactly. The cameras had recorded my schedule. When I left, when Emily left, when contractors arrived, when cattle were moved, when I had guests, when I was out of town. They had built a profile of my life. Then they used that information to pressure me. But there was one problem for them. They had recorded too much, and now we had access logs, hidden cameras, unauthorized infrastructure, financial records, and evidence of trespassing. Michael filed everything with the county. The sheriff's office obtained warrants. The underground room was seized. Sentinel Ridge's servers were subpoenaed. And then the real bombshell arrived. The recordings weren't limited to Cedar Hollow. The system had been collecting footage from several nearby developments. Thousands of hours. Families, children, private yards, trauma entrances, and in some cases, inside-facing cameras. The sheriff's office opened a criminal investigation. Margaret disappeared from public view. David hired an attorney. Linda resigned from the board. But the HOA wasn't finished. Gregory Shaw filed an emergency motion claiming that the investigation was based on misinterpreted security infrastructure. Michael laughed when he read it. Misinterpreted. He handed me the filing. I shook my head. They're still denying it. People who are losing control often deny reality longer than anyone expects. The court hearing took place 3 weeks later. The courthouse was packed. Neighbors filled the benches. Some looked angry. Some looked frightened. Others looked ashamed that they had supported the HOA. Margaret arrived with Gregory. She wore the same navy blazer and pearl earrings I'd seen at the first meeting. But the confidence was gone. David sat behind her. He wouldn't look at me. The judge entered. The hearing began. Gregory argued that the cameras were installed for community safety. Michael stood and said nothing. Then he called Thomas Reed. Thomas explained the unauthorized easement. Then Deputy Hill testified about the hidden cameras. Then a forensic specialist presented the access logs. Thousands of entries. Repeated access to private properties. Repeated access through administrator accounts. And then Michael introduced the most damaging evidence. The recording from the underground room. The moment David Parker entered my house. The courtroom became silent. Gregory objected. The judge overruled him. Then Michael played another recording. David was inside my home. He was speaking to Margaret through an earpiece. His voice echoed through the courtroom. He's getting suspicious. Margaret's recorded voice answered. Then increased the pressure. The room erupted. Margaret covered her face. I stared at the floor. Not because I felt sorry for her. Because I was thinking about every family in that neighborhood who had trusted the people sitting behind us. Michael wasn't finished. He played the financial recordings. Emails showed the developer wanted my ranch. They had discussed purchasing the property for years. When I refused their offer, the plan changed. Make me uncomfortable. Create violations. Challenge the fence. Challenge the barn. Question my access. Monitor my schedule. Wait until I was tired enough to sell. One email from David said he'll eventually give up. Everyone does. I looked across the courtroom. David finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was embarrassed. The judge ordered the HOA to cease all surveillance immediately. The unauthorized cameras were removed. The underground equipment was seized. The board members involved were suspended. The county revoked the HOA's security contract, and the development company became the subject of a broader investigation. But the most satisfying moment came later. The judge ruled that the HOA had no legal right to cross my property, operate infrastructure beneath it, or use surveillance to interfere with my private property rights. The easement they had claimed for years was officially rejected. My land remained mine. Every acre, every fence post, every tree, every inch of the pasture they'd tried to turn into a bargaining chip. But I didn't feel victorious when I walked out of the courthouse. I felt tired. Because victory doesn't erase the feeling of knowing someone watched your family when you thought you were safe. It doesn't erase the nights Emily woke up and checked the windows. It doesn't erase the fear. Healing took time. Months later, Cedar Hollow held another homeowners meeting. Margaret was gone. Linda was gone. A new board had been elected. The cameras were replaced with a much smaller system that monitored only public entrances and common areas, with strict access rules and independent oversight. The first thing the new board did was invite every homeowner to inspect the system. Nobody wanted secrets anymore. One evening, I stood beside my red barn watching the sun disappear behind the pasture. Thomas had come by to finish one last survey marker. Michael stood near the fence. Emily was sitting on the porch with our dogs. For the first time in a long time, the property felt peaceful again. Then Michael walked over. "You know," he said, "there's something I never understood." "What?" "Why did they keep the underground room hidden?" I looked toward the barn. "Because they thought nobody would ever find it." He smiled. "That's usually the mistake." I looked across the pasture. The camera poles were gone. The cables had been removed. The red lights that had watched our home were finally gone. I thought about the first night I'd seen that tiny red light. Back then, I thought the cameras were watching me. Now I understood the truth. They had been watching everyone. And in the end, the very cameras they installed to control us became the evidence that exposed them. I put my hat back on and looked toward the sunset. For 11 years, I thought home was the place where nobody could tell me what to do. I was wrong. Home is the place where you can finally close the door and know that nobody is watching. And sometimes, the people who spend the most time watching you are the ones who should have been watching their own backs.